It was the winter of 1871, and the wind outside the Doyle farmhouse carried the kind of cold that silences even the wolves. Inside, a single candle flickered, its weak flame stretching shadows across the wooden walls. The house was quiet, too quiet, until Catherine's mother awoke to a sound she could not explain, her daughter's voice. Soft, trembling yet steady, whispering names into the dark. At first she thought it was a dream, but then she heard it again, names the family didn't know. Some sounded old, others belonged to people long gone. The child's tone wasn't playful or frightened. It was deliberate, as though she was reciting. The mother crept closer, her bare feet brushing against the cold floor. Catherine sat upright in bed, her eyes half open, staring toward the corner of the room where no one stood. She whispered again. He didn't mean to bury her there. The candle flickered harder. The next morning, Catherine remembered nothing. But the whispers didn't stop. Each night, new names, new details, and dates, locations, fragments of prayers. Neighbors began to hear her voice through the thin wooden walls, carrying across the frost-bitten fields. And when one of the names she spoke turned out to belong to a missing villager, people began to wonder, was the child remembering something that had happened before she was born, or channeling something no one dared to believe in? As fear spread through the small town, Catherine Doyle became more than a child. She became a mystery, a haunting echo of the past, speaking truths that no one wanted unearthed. And the question that haunted them all was simple: how could a child recall crimes that predated her birth? It began with whispers, faint, fragile things that should have faded into the night air. But in the winter of 1871, in a lonely Irish village shrouded by fog and superstition, whispers carried weight. Catherine Doyle was only 6 years old when she started speaking in her sleep. At first, her mother thought it was nothing. Every child dreams, she told herself. Perhaps Catherine was only murmuring the fragments of stories she'd overheard by the fire. But after the third night, when the girl began naming people, living people, her mother started to listen more closely. "John Keegan," Catherine whispered, her small lips barely moving. "He took her to the field," she cried. Her mother froze. John Keegan was a neighbor, a farmer whose land bordered the parish's far field. The same field where, according to old tales, a woman had once gone missing long before Catherine was born. The child couldn't have known his name nor the story. No one spoke of it anymore. In the morning, her mother tried to ask her what the dream meant, but Catherine didn't remember dreaming at all. "I didn't see it," she said simply, stirring her porridge. "I just remembered it." The Doyle family lived on the edge of the parish, one of those forgotten corners of Ireland where fog clings to the hills and secrets feel older than the people who keep them. Life was quiet, predictable, ruled by the church bell and the turning of seasons. People knew their place, and no one, talked about the strange or unholy. So when word spread that the Doyle girl spoke of things she could not know, the town grew uneasy. The local priest, Father Kearns, was summoned to bless the house. He arrived carrying a small wooden cross and a flask of holy water, muttering Latin prayers as he walked through each room. Catherine watched him from her chair by the window, her eyes following him silently. When he sprinkled holy water over her head, she didn't flinch. She smiled. "She's too calm," he later told her mother. "Children fear holy water." Her mother's hands trembled. She doesn't fear much anymore, Father." Then came the stories. Catherine began to speak about places she had never been, describing in vivid detail an old stone bridge that had collapsed before she was born, or the inside of a farmhouse that had burned to the ground years ago. She told her teacher at Sunday school that a man named Declan had buried something under the willow tree by the creek. When asked what it was, she said, "A ring." He took it off before he left her there. The priest called it possession. The neighbors whispered about a curse. Her mother clung to hope, telling herself that her daughter was only sensitive, imaginative. But then Catherine started drawing. On scraps of paper, she sketched crude shapes: a woman lying in the mud, a rosary half buried beside her, and above it all went a church steeple. One night, her father came home drunk and angry from the tavern, furious at the gossip. "You'll stop this talk, girl," he shouted, slamming his fist on the table. "You're making fools of us." But Catherine didn't cry. She looked him in the eyes and said something no 6-year-old should ever say. It wasn't me who spoke first. It was her. The house fell silent. Even the fire seemed to dim. By early spring, the whispers had spread beyond the Doyle home. Farmers crossing the parish field claimed they heard a child's voice on the wind. Faint. Broken words like a prayer mixed with warning. Sheep refused to graze near the edge of the woods. A milkmaid swore she saw the girl standing near the willow one morning before dawn, though Catherine's mother insisted she'd been in bed. The tension grew unbearable. Some called for an exorcism. Others said the family should leave. But before anyone could act, Catherine's words proved themselves in the most horrifying way. A week after Easter, a group of young men went to dig a drainage trench near the parish field. The ground was soft from the rain, the air thick with the scent of peat. They dug until one of them struck something hard, something that wasn't stone. Within minutes, they unearthed what looked like old cloth. Beneath it, bones, human. The parish fell into chaos. Police were called from the nearest town. They said it was the remains of a woman, buried shallow decades earlier, too long ago to name. But the rumors didn't stop. Everyone remembered what Catherine had said. Behind the willow. Everyone remembered the name she whispered, John Keegan. Father Kearns returned once more, not to bless the house, but to question the girl. "Child," he asked, "how did you know where she was buried?" Catherine looked up from her chair, her small hands folded in her lap. "She told me," she said softly. "She said she wanted the church to hear her story." The priest left without a word. From that night onward, Catherine Doyle became both a mystery and a curse. Some called her gifted. Others whispered that she was touched by something unholy. Her mother stopped taking her to Mass. The family's small home became a prison of silence, and yet Catherine still spoke to the empty corners of the room. Sometimes her mother would wake to find her standing at the window, staring toward the parish field. "She's waiting," Catherine would murmur. "For who?" her mother asked. For the next one they buried. The whispers had begun as dreams. Now, they were becoming history, unearthed one name, one grave at a time. And somewhere between truth and madness, between the voice of a child and the voice of the dead, Catherine Doyle had crossed a line no one could explain. The village would never be the same again, because once a secret starts speaking, it never stops. The rumors began quietly, carried by the wind that passed through the chapel gates and whispered along the parish road. Catherine Doyle, the pale, soft-spoken child from the edge of town, had uttered something no one dared repeat aloud. She spoke of Father Merrin, the village priest, not as a man of God, but as the keeper of something buried. At first, her words were dismissed as nonsense, a child's imagination twisted by fever dreams. The church bells rang as usual, and the faithful came to kneel beneath the stained glass glow. But there was a new weight in the air, a stillness that even prayer couldn't lift. Catherine's mother noticed how the priest's eyes lingered on her daughter during Sunday Mass, not with kindness, but with unease. Then one evening, Catherine began to cry out in her sleep. Her voice trembled, repeating fragments of Latin prayers that no child her age could have known. Between sobs, she whispered about a garden of bones near the rectory. Her mother woke her, trembling, and pressed her for meaning. Catherine only said one thing: he buried what shouldn't have been buried. The next morning, word spread through the narrow dirt lanes. Some said the devil was using the girl's tongue to slander a holy man. Others said heaven had chosen her as a vessel to reveal the truth. The village was split between faith and fear. Father Merrin, a man admired for decades, called for a private audience with Catherine's mother. Behind the thick oak doors of the rectory, he warned her that evil speaks sweetly through children. He urged her to pray, to cleanse her home, and to silence her daughter's imagination before it spread corruption through the town. But the mother noticed something strange. As the priest spoke, his hands trembled. There was a nervous twitch near his jaw, a faint pallor that wasn't there before. He ended their meeting abruptly, insisting the matter not be discussed further. Days later, Catherine described a new vision, a cellar beneath the old church floorboards. She spoke of the sound of a shovel scraping stone, of muffled voices crying from the earth. The details were too vivid, too precise. The villagers began to whisper again, this time behind the priest's back. A young gravedigger, curious and frightened, decided to test the child's words. Under the cover of night, He slipped through the churchyard and pried open the wooden trapdoor leading beneath the altar. The scent that met him was unmistakable, the heavy, sour rot of decay. By dawn, the town was awake with panic. The gravedigger had fled the parish pale and shaking, refusing to say what he'd seen. Only one phrase escaped his lips before he left. She was right. The church quickly sealed the basement, claiming structural instability. Father Merrin gave a sermon that Sunday about false prophets, about the danger of listening to the voices of the wicked. Yet, as he spoke, Catherine sat silently beside her mother. Her eyes fixed on him, her expression was calm, almost knowing. Behind the scenes, documents began to surface. Letters from families whose loved ones had gone missing over the years. Farmhands, travelers, even a few children who had served at the altar. No one had ever asked too many questions before. Now they were. The mother tried to protect her daughter, forbidding her from speaking to anyone outside their home. But Catherine continued to write, filling scraps of paper with strange sketches. A church, a staircase, and a figure holding a lantern in one hand and a rosary in the other. Beneath it, she wrote 3 words. "He still listens." The priest began to unravel under the pressure. His sermons grew erratic, his eyes sunken. Some claimed they saw him late at night wandering the cemetery with a spade, muttering prayers under his breath. And then one night he vanished. The rectory door stood open, the candles still burning. His Bible lay on the desk, marked on a passage from the book of Job. "For the thing which I greatly feared is come upon me." The church tried to move on, to erase what had happened. But the townspeople never forgot the child who spoke what no one dared to know. And in the following weeks, when the wind moved through the parish fields, they swore they could still hear her voice, whispering softly. He buried what shouldn't have been buried. In the weeks following Father Merrin's disappearance, the small Irish town of Wexford slipped into a quiet unease. The church bell no longer rang. The candles in the parish were left to burn out on their own. And through that silence, the only sound that remained constant was Catherine Doyle's faint whispering. Her mother, Eliza, prayed that the nightmares would fade, that whatever strange power had taken hold of her daughter would loosen its grip. But instead, the silence only deepened, and Catherine began to draw. It started with small markings, faint crosses scratched into the margins of her old prayer book. But soon the crosses appeared everywhere, on the wooden walls of her room, on the insides of cabinet doors, and sometimes even on the window pane, drawn in the fog her breath left behind. Each cross bore a single name beneath it. At first, her mother thought these were the names of her schoolmates or local saints. But one evening, when she took a closer look, she froze. Some of the names belonged to villagers long dead. Others were strangers, people no one had ever heard of. And then came the most chilling realization. Every one of those names matched the records of those buried in the churchyard, even those who had been gone for decades before Catherine was born. When word spread, the neighbors whispered that the girl was possessed. Others believed she was touched by something divine, a voice for the forgotten souls that still wandered between worlds. Whatever she was, one thing was certain: Catherine knew too much. One night, Eliza found her daughter standing barefoot in the yard, her nightdress fluttering in the cold wind. Catherine's hands were clasped together, her fingers trembling as she traced a large cross into the dirt. Her lips moved, whispering softly, but the words were not her own. It was Latin, the language of the priests. The prayer was unmistakable: Requiem aeternam dona eis Domine. Grant them eternal rest, O Lord. Terrified, Eliza rushed her inside and called for help. 2 doctors from the county arrived days later, skeptical and impatient. They examined the child, noted her strange drawings and night terrors, and dismissed the entire matter as religious hysteria. One of them even remarked, "Imagination can be contagious, especially among the faithful." But during their final visit, something happened that neither man could explain. As they spoke to Eliza in the kitchen, Catherine began to hum from the other room, a slow, sorrowful hymn. The air turned heavy, as if the walls themselves were listening. When the doctors approached her, she opened her eyes and began speaking in that same unfamiliar rhythm, naming the dead again. One of the names she uttered was Father Merrin's. The doctors left without another word. That night, neither candle nor clock dared move in the Doyle home. It was as if time itself was holding its breath. Catherine's drawings grew darker, not in tone but in meaning. She began sketching a figure kneeling beneath a massive cross. When asked who it was, she simply said, "Me." Her mother cried silently that night, realizing that the line between faith and fear had completely vanished. Was her daughter cursed nor chosen? Soon after, Catherine fell ill. Her dreams turned violent. Her sleep was restless. She would wake up clutching her hands so tightly that small drops of blood marked her palms, as if she had tried to hold the cross too firmly. Some villagers began leaving rosaries and tokens outside their door, hoping to appease whatever unseen forces surrounded the child. Others stopped visiting entirely. One late autumn evening, Catherine awoke and told her mother she had seen a man of light standing beside her bed. "He told me the dead are listening now," she whispered. They just needed someone to speak for them. After that, she fell silent for days. Eliza burned some of the drawings, but by morning, new ones appeared, drawn on the very ashes of the old. The cross, once a holy symbol of redemption, had become something else entirely. It was now a mirror, reflecting guilt, silence, and the haunting weight of things buried too long. And Catherine Doyle was caught in the space between salvation and sorrow. Winter came early that year. The frost clung to the windows like thin white veils, and the air in Wexford grew still, the kind of stillness that feels like the world itself is waiting for something terrible to happen. Inside the Doyle home, the once flickering candles had burned out for good. Catherine had grown quieter with each passing day. Her mother said she seemed to drift between this world and another, eyes open but not seeing, lips moving but no longer speaking words anyone could understand. And then one night in December, she was simply gone. Eliza woke before dawn to the sound of the front door creaking open. A rush of cold air swept through the house, and when she reached her daughter's room, the bed was empty. The blanket was still warm, the window cracked slightly open. A trail of footprints led out into the frozen yard and toward the mist-covered fields beyond. The search began immediately. Neighbors with lanterns combed the woods and fields, calling her name until their voices broke the silence. For days they scoured every ditch, every riverbank, every hollow tree, but no one found Catherine. Not a trace, not a shoe, not a scrap of her nightdress, not even the cross she always carried, and yet the singing began. At first it was only whispers, faint melodies carried on the wind at dusk. Then, as the days passed, the townspeople swore they could hear a young girl's voice humming a lullaby across the fields. Some said it was the same hymn Catherine had sung for the dead. Others insisted it was only the wind through the reeds, but those who listened closely heard words. The same Latin prayer, Requiem aeternam dona eis Domine. Her mother refused to believe Catherine was gone. Every evening she would light a single candle in the window and sit by it waiting. Some nights she'd fall asleep at the table, only to wake and find the candle extinguished, the wick still smoking. The priest forbade talk of ghosts or miracles, claiming the devil was at work. But quietly he stopped walking near the parish fields after sunset. Weeks turned to months, and the story of the singing child spread across the region. Travelers passing through said they heard her too, a soft voice echoing through the fog near the churchyard, calling names they couldn't understand. It was said that one farmer, curious and half-drunk, followed the sound one night and came back pale, trembling, and unable to speak for days. He claimed he had seen her, a small figure in white, standing among the graves, her hands folded, her face serene. When he tried to approach, she faded like smoke in the wind. By spring, no one dared speak her name aloud. The Doyles left town under the cover of night. The house was boarded up and left to rot. Nature reclaimed it, ivy curling over the door, the roof sagging until it caved. But locals say that on cold winter nights, a faint light still glows through the cracks in the wall, as if a candle still burns there for Catherine's return. Decades later, in 1902, a group of laborers clearing the old parish field made a discovery. Beneath the earth, where the grass had grown unnaturally thick, they uncovered a series of small unmarked graves. No headstones, no records, just rough wooden crosses that had long since decayed. Among the remains they found a single silver locket, tarnished but still intact. Inside was a child's drawing, a cross with a circle of small figures beneath it. On the back, faintly scratched, were the words, "They are still listening." The coroner ruled the discovery historical and moved on. But for the people of Wexford, it reopened old wounds and old fears. Some said those were the very graves Catherine had spoken of as a child. Others whispered darker things, that one of the graves might have been meant for her. Eliza Doyle was never seen again after leaving town. Some claimed she went mad, wandering from parish to parish searching for her daughter's ghost. Others said she found peace in a convent up north, where she spent her final days tending to candles and praying in silence. But Catherine, the child who spoke the secrets of the dead, was never found. Her story became legend, passed down in whispers from one generation to the next. Parents would warn their children, "If you hear the girl singing in the fields, don't answer. Don't look back." Even today, on misty winter nights, locals say you can hear her voice drifting over the hills, soft, sad, and unending. They buried the girl, the old ones still say, but not her voice. Time has a way of softening tragedy, of turning blood into myth, but when the past is buried in both soil and shame, even silence can echo. It was the year 1898, almost 3 decades after Catherine Doyle vanished. In the damp archives of St. Augustine Parish, a young historian named Thomas Kellen discovered something unusual, a ledger with erased names. Pages torn, ink blotted, but beneath the faded script faint impressions remained. One of them read, "C. Doyle, unsanctioned burial." The parish never recorded children in the burial logs without family rights. Yet here it was, hidden among the ledgers as if someone had tried to unwrite her existence. Thomas dug deeper. He uncovered letters exchanged between 2 priests, dated months after Catherine's disappearance. One letter, never sent, carried a cryptic line. The child spoke what she could not have known. "We silenced her for the good of the flock." It wasn't proof, but it was enough to stir doubt. Soon, more anomalies surfaced. Missing parishioner records, sealed confession notes, and reassigned clergymen who'd abruptly left town in the winter of 1872. Each thread led to another, forming a quiet pattern, a tapestry woven from secrets and guilt. Thomas began visiting the field Catherine once spoke of, the one near the parish boundary. Locals avoided it still, saying the soil there never stayed quiet. When he brought in a team of amateur historians and ground-penetrating tools, they found disturbances beneath the old willow roots, bones, several small, and old enough to belong to Catherine's century. Forensic testing decades later could only confirm they were female, child-aged, and buried without coffin or record. But not just one. 3 bodies, unmarked and unclaimed. The discovery reignited local legend. Newspapers called it the parish field mystery. Some saw it as divine punishment, others as a cover-up finally unmasked. The church once again urged restraint, labeling the findings speculative and coincidental, but Catherine's story had escaped their walls long ago. Folk singers began composing mournful ballads about the girl who spoke to the dead. Old women whispered that Catherine had been a messenger, not of evil but of truth, and by silencing her the village had cursed itself with endless guilt. Decades passed. The field was fenced, then forgotten. Yet every few years, locals claimed to hear a child's hymn drifting through the cold, around the anniversary of her disappearance. Always the same tune, the same haunting rhythm. In the late 20th century, her case became a fascination for psychologists and paranormal historians alike. Some argued she suffered from cryptomnesia, accidental memory of overheard gossip mistaken for supernatural recall. Others believed she was a medium, bridging the veil between confession and consequence. But the documents, once re-examined, told a subtler story. In the priest's unsigned notes, a final passage appeared at the bottom of a page, half erased but still legible. "She spoke the name I buried. How could she have known what I did not confess aloud?" That line changed everything. Historians began to suspect the missing parishioners were not lost to illness or migration, but victims of an unrecorded purge, buried beneath church ground and silence alike. Catherine, it seemed, had remembered what she should never have known, acts that predated her birth by years. Her visions weren't madness. They were recollections of buried truths, stories whispered into the air of her small home by a conscience that wasn't hers. And so, Catherine Doyle became something more than a ghost story. She became a mirror, one that forced the faithful to confront what faith sometimes hides. To this day, The parish archive keeps a small plaque near the recovered ledger. It reads simply Catherine Doyle, 1865-1871, the child who remembered too much. Visitors leave candles, drawings of crosses and notes written in children's handwriting. We hear you, Catherine. No one can say what truly happened that winter night, whether she was taken, silenced, or something beyond explanation carried her away. But the story refuses to rest. Even the archivist who maintains the site says that, on certain nights, when he closes the records and locks the door, he hears soft humming from the storage vault, the melody of a child's hymn echoing faintly through the corridor. And in that moment, every generation that forgot her remembers, because some voices were never meant to be buried, and some truths, no matter how long they sleep, always find a way to speak again. The lantern flickers one last time. The wind hums through the empty fields where Catherine once played, and for a moment, the silence feels alive. More than a century has passed since her name first slipped from parish records, but the question remains, was Catherine Doyle cursed? Or chosen? Maybe she wasn't the child of evil whispers. Maybe she was the echo of a town's buried guilt, a living reminder of sins the living refused to face. In 1871, silence was a kind of religion. Communities, built on faith and fear, learned to hide what they couldn't explain, but truth, no matter how deep it's buried, always finds a way to breathe, sometimes through wind, sometimes through the dreams of a little girl who spoke names no one should know. Her story was never about demons or divine punishment. It was about people, fragile, fearful people who chose denial over confession. And that is what makes Catherine's life so haunting. When truth is ignored, it doesn't disappear, it lingers. It attaches itself to places, to names, to generations who never asked for it. And one day, it begins to speak again. Catherine's whispers were the sound of that truth returning, and no priest, no doctor, no desperate prayer could make it stop. They called her possessed, they called her dangerous, but maybe she was just honest. Maybe her only sin was remembering what others needed to forget. The tragedy of her story isn't only in her disappearance, it's in how quickly everyone moved on. They built new churches, raised new children, and let the grass cover the graves she spoke of. But beneath every blade of that grass, the silence kept growing. That's the thing about guilt. It doesn't fade, it changes shape, it becomes folklore. It becomes a bedtime story told to keep the children quiet. Until one day, those stories begin to sound too real. Catherine became that story, both warning and witness. She blurred the line between ghost and girl, truth and superstition, and in doing so, she exposed the oldest sin of all, complicity. Every neighbor who turned away, every mother who said don't speak of it, every priest who buried questions with bodies, they all became part of her, haunting. Because silence is its own violence, and maybe that's why her voice never truly died. Even now, her name appears in forgotten letters, her story retold by strangers who feel an ache they can't explain. Because somewhere deep down, we all recognize her. We all carry our own buried truths, the moments we refused to see, the things we told ourselves were better left unsaid. Catherine's ghost doesn't ask for fear, she asks for acknowledgement, not vengeance, not worship, just the dignity of being believed. Maybe that's what all ghosts want, not to haunt us, but to be heard. And that's where her legend becomes a mirror, a reflection of every town, every family, every institution that buries what it cannot bear to face. A reminder that silence does not protect the innocent, it only protects the lie. We tell ourselves we've evolved, that we don't live in those times anymore. But how many truths are still being whispered behind closed doors? How many Catherine Doyles are still out there, silenced by disbelief, buried under convenience? History doesn't just record the great battles and the kings. It also hides the quiet wars, the ones fought in bedrooms, in confession halls, in the minds of the forgotten. And that's what this story truly is, not a haunting, but a confession delayed by generations. Catherine's tale isn't meant to terrify you, it's meant to remind you that every secret has a voice, and that voice will find you, whether in your dreams or in the pages of history you refuse to open. So as the music fades, as the candle burns out, listen closely. The story isn't over, it never was, because silence creates ghosts, and truth, no matter how long it takes, will always set them free. If you believe history still hides its darkest children, subscribe for more forbidden stories.